How's it going, everybody? This is Cameron White with White Light Astrology, and welcome back to your favorite weekly horoscope. What the fuck is going on in the universe for September 2nd through September 9th of 2019? Thank you guys so much for being here and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys, and I'm so glad you guys can be here. This week, we are finally now deep into Virgo season. We just got off the new moon in Virgo. We just got off the Mars conjoining the sun in Virgo. This week's highlights, we have Mercury conjoining Mars while it's in Virgo, and then we're going to have Mercury going Cazimi and conjoining Mars. Basically, Mercury, the sun, and Mars are going to be at 10 degrees Virgo, all smashed up together. Then we also have Venus opposing Neptune and Mercury opposing Neptune this week. And you know, while you could look at this as kind of oh, that's not really too much going on, I think the Mercury Cazimi is kind of we go through how many of those a year? That's got to be 12 of those a year? And with Mercury conjoining Mars, there's a little bit more emphasis on this Mars and Virgo energy, just like there was last week with Mars conjoining the sun. But as we get into the end of, or towards the end of this week, when we have Venus opposed Neptune and Mercury opposed Neptune, I think that this just brings up more of the Virgo qualities that we're experiencing this week. So I think that this week is really going to not necessarily look the same as last week, but it's going to be a lot more progressive. I mean, I'm sure as you guys felt with this new moon in Virgo, it's everyone's wanting to get some stuff done, organize something, be healthier, or whatever it is, whatever that looks like for you guys. You can probably see that a lot of people are embracing that energy. And this week, it's only getting more detailed. It's only getting a little bit more advanced. It's only going farther with that. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the horoscope. Before we begin too, also, if you guys want to be seeing these weekly horoscopes earlier, make sure you guys go and check out my Patreon, which I'm going to be launching on Tuesday. So don't forget about that. I'm going to be posting my weekly horoscopes on Saturday nights on my Patreon, so you don't have to wait until Monday morning like you usually have to with these ones. But as we go into Monday on September 2nd, we have the moon entering Scorpio, giving us a little bit more of a intense feeling, a little bit more piercing feeling. The moon in Scorpio is in its detriment, or I should say in its fall. And so when the moon's in Scorpio, it can kind of not have all of the tools that it needs to, be as emotionally expressive as the moon would like to be. But the moon is a reflector, and while it's going through Scorpio and it's in this Mars-ruled sign, Mars is just fresh off this Cazimi now, and so we're in this new chapter, this new synod cycle with Mars, and while the moon's in Scorpio, I think this is going to be a good time to really focus on what are we focusing on. The moon in Scorpio is going to really help us kind of interlock where our passion is, where we want to put our, our energy and invest our emotions into. So we'll go through Monday. I think this is going to be a good time to just kind of kick off the week with, an emotionally charged intention with whatever it is that you're kind of looking for. But also on Monday, we're going to be having Mercury conjoin Mars, and I think that this is going to be kind of interesting because there's, again, a lot of Mars energy being focused on right here. While Mars is in Virgo, and it's kind of wanting us, it was funny, the other day, I accidentally booked 6 readings, all in a row, and it was that's so Mars in Virgo, at the last second, all of a sudden I'm doing, back to back to back to back to back, and I was super tired, but it's just funny because Mars is my time lord, but that's another story. But while Mars is in Virgo, it's kind of wanting to focus, wanting to do all of this work, wanting to be detailed, and kind of being just energized for it. However, as Mercury conjoins Mars, Mercury is kind of speaking out this this voice of Mars. Mercury is a projector. Mercury is the communicator. And as Mercury is in its domicile sign of Virgo, communication's really good right now. And as Mercury conjoins Mars, I think that this is just about Mars being kind of expressed a little bit more to where we can better understand what we're trying to put our intentions into, where we're trying to take our energy. Also on Monday, we're having Venus square Jupiter. So with all of that combo of the moon in Scorpio, Mercury conjoining Mars, Venus squaring Jupiter, Monday really looks like a kind of a pumped up day to kind of initiate or start anything that you may have wanted to with this new moon in Virgo. However, on Monday, when we have Venus squaring Jupiter, I think this is kind of a time to really look at if we want all of this Jupiter and Sagittarius stuff to finally start coming to fruition, what are we willing to do? What time are we willing to take? Where are we willing to focus our value and our energy on the specific details in order to get that done? Mars, the Sun, Mercury, Venus, they're all in a superior square to Jupiter. So there's a lot more kind of power and influence given to Venus right now, even though she's in her fall, even though, everything is kind of like combust right now. I think this is just a really good time to focus on the detail, focus on, your to-do list, kind of getting your agenda done, and doing that in alignment towards whatever Jupiter and Sagittarius, like wherever that's at in your chart, whatever you're trying to grow with that, wherever you're trying to expand with Jupiter and Sag, this is kind of the time to focus up and kind of attack that. But then as we get into Tuesday on September 3rd, this is when we're going to have the Sun, Mars, Mercury all conjoin while Mercury's going Cazimi. And, this is kind of like why I use this as my election for launching my Patreon, but this is like a really cleansing energy with Mercury in Virgo. Like we had that nasty retrograde that we had over the summer with, Mars opposing Saturn and the Mercury retrograde in Leo. But as Mercury's now in Virgo, it's in its home sign, it's Cazimi, so there's like this, revitalized energy in the sense of our communication, a sense of our understanding, our thoughts, our ideas, how we vocalize those things, how we process that stuff. And while Mars is there too, instead of just being so, mentally ready, so mentally accessible, this is very much like, the second it clicks in your head, it's the second that you can go and the second that you can start actually initiating, actually starting to pursue something. So I think Tuesday is going to be really progressive when it comes to like getting our mind and our body and our actions aligned with, what our souls are kind of wanting. And I say souls as in like that essence of ourselves. Like what are we really wanting to strive for? What are our ambitions? Where are our goals? This is Virgo season. I'm sure this is definitely not vacation time. But then as we get into Wednesday on September 4th, that's when we're going to have the moon enter Sagittarius. And as the moon enters Sagittarius, this is becoming a little bit more lighthearted. The moon was in Scorpio for Monday and Tuesday, so things were a little bit more intense. We were a little more emotionally invested and driven into what we were doing. But as the moon goes into Sagittarius, things get to open up a little bit more. We get to experience a little bit more thought, a little bit more fun. And the moon in Sagittarius, it's very reflective, very like philosophical, very it questions a lot of things is a good way to put it. So while the moon goes into Sagittarius, I want you guys to like really look at where are the possibilities that are opening up to you at this time with what you're doing with all this Virgo stuff. What could possibly be the end result of all of this? And look at this in a positive way. What can actually happen after you be consistent, after you lock in all this Virgo type energy of just continuously doing something and committing to it. There is a lot of opportunities that can happen. And on Wednesday as well, we have Venus opposing Neptune. And yeah, Venus is in her fall right now where it's a little bit difficult for her to really find this joy, really find this value. And I talk a lot about that in my monthly horoscopes. But as Venus opposes Neptune, this is really about having that value shift that I was kind of hitting on. Like Venus in Virgo is kind of like, I really want to focus on these things, on these details, on this specific thing in this specific way. And as Venus opposes Neptune, this is kind of like being able to see where exactly placing your value can be detrimental versus placing your value can actually open you up to different possibilities, to bigger things that you've kind of, have locked into your subconscious that you're wanting to grow into. Does that make sense? But yeah, as we go through Wednesday while the moon's in Sag, opening yourself up to new possibilities, Venus opposing Neptune, being able to see that value shift of where to place your energy, where to place your focus, where to place your value. It becomes a little bit more clear. However, I would like to say too, as Venus opposes Neptune, it can be easy to get lost into the fog. It can get easy to get confused or, kind of like under the spell of an illusion, see things through with rose-colored glasses. So as we go through Wednesday, it's going to be really important to make sure you know what you're looking at, not necessarily getting too hyped up in the moon Sagittarius mood and the whole Neptune stuff, but being able to take a step back and conservatively look at what exactly you're investing yourself into. Then on Thursday, on September 5th, we have the moon conjoining Jupiter, and while the moon's conjoining Jupiter, Mercury will be squaring Jupiter. And I think this is interesting because while the moon's conjoining Jupiter, Jupiter's direct now. Yeah, sure, it's receiving a bunch of squares from everything, but that's not too bad at the moment. But while the moon is conjoining Jupiter, this is really opening up those doors. This is kind of like, hey, what do I want to grow into? What do I believe? What do I feel excited about? What am I optimistic about? This is also going to be a time of like really kind of like receiving that Jupiter abundance every time the moon does conjoin Jupiter. But on Wednesday as well as on Thursday as well, as Mercury squares Jupiter, this is kind of like, if Jupiter has all these big visions, has all these big dreams of what, it wants to fulfill, of what it wants to accomplish, of what it wants to have, Mercury in Virgo is kind of like, well, if you want all of that stuff, it's going to take all of these little tiny steps to get there. And I think that this is important because while Mercury is in Virgo, it's in its home sign, it's able to do its job really, really well right now. As Mercury squares Jupiter, if you want to hit all of these goals, if you want to, if like, let's say if Jupiter's in your 7th house and you want more relationships, you want more better positive experience in your life, Mercury's in your, 4th house area right now, squaring Jupiter. It's kind of like, where do you need to recenter yourself? Where do you need to recenter your communication in order to open up doors for that Jupiter and Sagittarius to come through into your 7th house? And I say that because while Mercury is squaring Jupiter, it's like, this is the time to really go, hey, if I want this, I've got to write down the steps that I've got to take in order to accomplish it. And it's totally possible. It may be a little bit frustrating. It may be a little bit difficult to write it all down. And then you're like, oh shit, man, there's a lot to do. But it's totally doable. Then as we get into Friday on September 6th, we just have Mercury opposing Neptune. And like I talked about in my monthly horoscopes, it was like we went from this value shift to this mental shift. And on Friday is that mental shift of like being able to go, okay, I see what is possible and I also see what is not possible. What is, a healthy dream, like a healthy, optimistic, goal versus what is like an illusion? What is Neptune like deceiving you on? Because Neptune does that. Like Neptune makes you think like, oh, this is how it is versus it actually isn't that way once the fog kind of gets cleared out. So while Mercury opposes Neptune on Friday, make that mental shift of like, hey, what is actually possible? Like that Mercury square Jupiter, being able to write it down, seeing your way to your goal. However, also what is not possible? What is just being, what is deception? What is not clear? And as Mercury does oppose Neptune, it may be a little bit difficult to decipher all of that, but just give yourself some time. It's not about making, it's not about making decisions overnight. It's not about blah, 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 blah. It's not about making decisions at that moment. It's just about seeing the evidence, seeing the facts, and then making a decision from there. Then as we get into this weekend, on Saturday, September 7th, that is when we're going to have the moon enter Capricorn, and that's kind of like it on Saturday, and I think that this is going to be kind of nice after we have this really progressive week. So we get into the weekend, the moon goes into Capricorn, where, it's going to go through that Saturn South Node Pluto mess. But there's this sense, I talk about this all the time, like the moon in Capricorn, like detachment, being able to harden your emotions for a second to get some work done. So Saturday, I don't want to necessarily say is going to be an amazing day, but it's not definitely going to be a bad day. It's going to be a very simple day. And as the moon does go into Capricorn, where do you need to solidify your, emotions in order to align yourself with the actions that you're trying to get on? You know what I mean? It's kind of like, if you want to make change, if you want to start something now, you still, even though it can be hard to actually make those changes, you kind of have to get to a point where you're willing to do whatever it takes. And that moon in Capricorn, on Saturday kind of helps us detach away from our emotional investment into things to where we can just get it done. And then on Saturday, as the moon conjoins Saturn and goes over the South Node, it's like, what responsibilities do we need to attend to? What responsibilities do we need to handle? What is, causing us constraint? What is, causing us limitations? What are the walls that are in our way? And what are we going to do to face those? And as the moon kind of conjoins that, it's kind of like being able to face these past responsibilities or these obligations that we already have set up for us. So Sunday could be a definitely good time to go back to any prior responsibilities or obligations that you need to fulfill. But also on Sunday is when we're going to have Mars trine Saturn. And this is pretty positive because, we have Mars in Virgo wanting to do it all, wanting to get the tasks done, cross all the T's, dot all the I's. And as it's making as it's applying to a trine with Saturn, Saturn's over here getting really close to stationing direct. And this is pretty positive when it comes to Saturn being like, hey, you have responsibilities, you have obligations, you have things that you've got to attend to that are getting in your way regardless if you want to or not. Mars trining Saturn is kind of like you're able to have the best of both worlds in the sense of being able to focus your energy on one thing of what you're wanting to do, but also being able to use, since you're being so focused on that, having more extra time to be able to handle those other obligations, to handle those other responsibilities. So a Mars trine Saturn, it's like, this is the time to if you want to put, really lay down the foundation, really put in some hard work, the Sunday. This is the time to really start it as we get into next week. Because then on September 9th, as we get into next Monday, that's when the moon is going to be starting to make a trine to Mercury and Venus, and way later on actually enter Aquarius because it's going to be at the last degrees of Capricorn. And as we start next week on Monday, as the moon's trining Mercury and Venus, Mars is trining Saturn, all of these conjunctions are happening. It's all Earth stuff. There's so much positive, tangible, physical energy to utilize when it comes to This isn't just fire energy about how we feel or how we're expressing those things. This is earth energy. Like, let's get shit done. Let's make shit real. Let's actually accomplish it. Let's make it tangible. Let's make it a reality. And I think that's what's really important about this week. And especially with going into next week. Because next week we have the sun opposing Neptune. We have the full moon in Pisces. We have Mercury and Venus conjoining each other and going into Libra at the same time. And then we're going to be having Mars oppose Neptune. So I think as we do start next week on Monday with the moon trining Venus and Mercury, we just got all of this, super earthy energy. Then next week having the sun oppose Neptune, this full moon in Pisces, Venus going into her domicile sign of Libra. There's a lot of exciting stuff to be moved to that is going to keep continuing to move on. And I think that not only this past week with Mars conjoining the sun, but this week with Mercury conjoining the sun and Venus squaring Jupiter and everything opposing Neptune, this is the time to start to get the ball rolling. And it's kind of like the snowball effect. If you started your snowball this past weekend, you're going to start seeing it accumulate and grow bigger and bigger as we even get into next week. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for being here, liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys. And thank you so much for continuously supporting me. And I'll be seeing you next week.